Hi, I'm Caitlin from the Museum of Ontario Archaeology here in the northwest end of London. As a museum, we are dedicated to connecting people to the stories of the human experience through time and place, and it is our mission to share, interpret, and care for the archaeological record to advance an understanding of Ontario's heritage. Let's explore a little bit about what archaeology is with some trivia. Let's see how much you know about archaeology and archaeology here in London. Let's start at the beginning. What exactly is archaeology? Is it A, the study of past life on Earth, B, the study of past human life, C, the study of fossils, or D, the study of dinosaurs? The answer is B. Archaeology is the study of past human life, primarily through the material remains people have left behind. Archaeology can inform us on the daily lives of people from the past. This includes what people ate, what kinds of homes they lived in, and what kinds of tools they used.
What is an artifact? Is it A, a piece of art, B, rocks, C, something a person made or used in the past, or D, a fossil? The answer is C, something a person made or used in the past. An artifact is any object that can be collected by archaeologists today that was made or used by a person in the past. This could include tools like arrow points or axes, pottery or ceramics, toys, food remains, and clothing.
The Lawson Site is adjacent to the museum. What kind of site is it, and from when? Is it A, an 18th century fur trading post, B, a 19th century farmstead, C, a 16th century indigenous farming village, or D, a 7th century indigenous camping site? The answer is C. The Lawson Site was home to approximately 1,500 to 2,000 Indigenous people between 1500 and 1525, and at its largest, there were 35 to 40 longhouses within the village. It was a farming community with vast fields of primarily maize and beans, but possibly also squash, stretching out in all directions surrounding the village. The site itself has been known since the mid-19th century and has been excavated throughout the 20th century.
How can archaeologists tell how old an artifact is? Is it A, they can look at the shape, decorations, or technology of an artifact? B, the date is printed or stamped on the artifacts? C, they have time machines and can travel back in time? Or D, both A and B? The answer is D, both A and B are correct. A is a method called seriation. It is done by comparing artifacts to other artifacts that have been found on other sites over the past century. Over time, and with lots of examples, we can begin to understand patterns of design and style and how they have changed. Consider how clothing has changed in design over the past 100 years, for example. Projectile points, like these, are an example of artifacts that can be dated using this technique. The second type is where the date is printed or stamped on the artifacts, and this does happen on some kinds of artifacts. Coins are stamped with the date they were minted or made, and ceramic pottery, for example, is frequently stamped with something called maker's marks, which are changed each year, and you can compare them to a list of marks to get an accurate date.
which London park was once home to the city's military barracks? Is it A, Kensal Park, B, Springbank Park, C, Westminster Ponds, or D, Victoria Park? The answer is D. Victoria Park was the site of the British Framed Infantry Barracks during the 1800s, but burned down in a fire in 1869. A systematic archaeological survey in 1997 confirmed that archaeological remains were remarkably well preserved and provided interesting details about the barracks. However, all of these options are locations of archaeological sites. To find out more, join the museum's free heritage scavenger hunt by visiting www.amawayscavengerhunt.com.
How do archaeologists find sites? A, through research, old maps, land documents, etc. B, walking along plowed fields to look for artifacts. C, listening to indigenous knowledge holders. D, all of the above. The answer is D, all of the above. Multiple methods can be used for a single site. These are just a few ways of locating archaeological sites.
What is the main reason archaeological sites are excavated in Ontario? Is it A, when construction is being done on a piece of land? B, when someone locates an artifact? C, when someone is curious about what's in the ground? Or D, for academic research? The answer is A. Most archaeological excavations that are done in Ontario happen because the land where they are located is going to be developed. It is a legal requirement before construction on previously undeveloped land to do an archaeological survey and complete any archaeological work that is revealed before construction can begin.
In Ontario, who is responsible for collections after they are excavated? A, the archaeologists, B, the landowner, C, the people of Ontario, or D, the government of Ontario? The answer is A. Archaeological excavations in Ontario must be conducted by a licensed archaeologist, and they become responsible for all materials that are recovered and recorded after the work is done. They are allowed to transfer this responsibility along with the collections to public institutions like the Museum of Ontario Archaeology, where they will be held in trust for the people of Ontario.
What is a post mold? Is it A, the mold used to shape a post? Is it B, the mold that grows on a post as it rots? Is it C, a stain on the ground made of dirt and rotted wood from a post? Or D, a post made from a mold? The answer is C. When a wooden post decomposes, such as the ones used in longhouses, it forms soil. Since these wooden posts were buried in ground, if they are undisturbed, the organic material will rot and create a dark brown colored soil due to the nutrients in the wood. And this dark soil will contrast against lighter soil that surrounds it. It is basically a mold of what used to be a post.
Now that we've had an opportunity to answer some questions about archaeology and to learn a little bit more about it along the way, let's take a look at some artifacts similar to the ones on the Lawson site here at the museum. All of these artifacts that I'm going to show you are not from this site specifically, but they are examples of the kinds of artifacts that we find here. All of these ones are from throughout southwestern Ontario, and they were collected by the founder of the museum, Wilfred Jury, in about the 1920s through to the early 50s, and sort of amassed into a very large collection. So the first one that we're going to look at looks like this. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to ask you some questions. I'm going to give you some time to answer them as well. So shout out at your screen whatever you think the answers are. So the first one that we're going to look at here is a large rock with an indent in it. And that indent is there through where? It's not put there to begin with. And a smaller rock that looks a little bit like an egg, perhaps. And they work together like this. What do you think it is? If you said that you think it's grinding up food, or smashing food, or smushing food, or anything along those lines, that's exactly it. By grinding up food, we can prepare foods that are tough to cook and be a little bit easier to eat. Maize would have been the main food eaten on a village, or eaten in a village, like the Lawson Site here at the museum. And grinding up that corn, not on these little ones, but on very large versions of this, would have been incredibly important. This next one is something that looks like this, or maybe this. I'll show you a couple other examples too. So what do you think these are examples of? If you said pottery, you're absolutely correct. Pottery is made out of clay. You can find clay in areas like riverbeds, streams, creeks, areas like that where it's nice and damp. Clay is a very damp, sticky type of mud. And you can shape it into bowls, into pots. They can be small, they can be large. And most importantly, if you bake it, or you heat it, or you cook it, then that pottery becomes hard and it becomes, most importantly, waterproof. So you can store food in it, you can cook in it, you can do all sorts of different things with pottery. We still use pottery today. Our mugs and our plates and our things that many of us, most of us have in our kitchens, those are types of pottery. And for archaeologists, what's really important is that pottery doesn't rot. So even if you break it and it's just little pieces, we can still learn a lot of information from those pieces of pottery. The next thing that we're going to look at associates with our pottery a little bit, or at least it would be used with our pottery. And it looks like this. And you might be saying, that's just a shell. And it is just a shell. And if we find a shell like this, these are freshwater clam shells, along the Thames River, along the Medway Creek, near to the museum, then if we find them today, they're probably not that old, and they were used by the animal who lived in here not too long ago. But if we find them on an archaeological site, up on a hill where people had homes hundreds of years ago, then how did they get there? They got there by the people who lived in that village, picking them up and bringing them home. And most often, things had a purpose. And so with the shells, they could have a hole drilled through them, like this one here, in which case, what do you think we might want to do with that? If you said a bead, you're right. So we would put string through here, and small shells like these could be used as beads. Decoration. Another purpose for them, if there's no holes drilled through them, doesn't seem to be anything done to it at all, then they can be used for eating, like a spoon. So our last artifacts that we're going to look at together because they have something in common. The first one looks like this, and it is a hard stone like basalt or granite with a sharpened edge on one side. And these sort of triangular shape tools, they're also made of stone. They're made of a stone called chert, and they're made of breaking off little pieces. And they have these very sharp edges on them. Those are very important. Now, did you figure out what this one is? This is for chopping wood, and it is an axe. These are for hunting, and they are arrowheads, or arrow points, or projectile points, different names for them. And what do these have in common? They're missing the wooden portion of the tool. So the axes would have these long wooden handles, and the arrows would have long wooden arrow shafts. And for both of these, they've rotted away and they've disappeared. And so for archaeologists, we can only find the artifacts that remain on an archaeological site. Many things are made of organic materials, and they will have rotted away and disappeared. And so we are only able to find part of what people used and made in the past. Thank you for joining us for some trivia and some artifacts, and hopefully we'll see you at the museum soon.